Alright everybody, welcome back to Big Mac's Harem. Last time, Big Mac was gonna decide on who he wanted to keep out of his little relationship groups. But anyways, without further ado, let's hop right into it. Chapter 12. The next day, every pony on the farm was up bright and early, preparing for little Applemoon's birthday. As an early gift of sorts, she has been allowed to spend the night with Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo at the Carousel Boutique and was to be home around noon. That didn't give Applejack, Big Macintosh, and Granny Smith a lot of time to prepare, so they tried to get everything done before she returned so that they could throw her a surprise party. Granny Smith was standing atop a dangerously teetering stool and taping the banners up while Applejack was wrapping up the gift they had gotten for Applebloom. Big Macintosh, Granny Smith said as she looked over at him as she teetered dangerously left and right. "I need you to go get the cake. That nice Pinkie Pie filly said she would take care of it, so all need to do is go get it." Big Macintosh nodded and went to head for the door, but stopped briefly when Granny Smith yelled at him, "And don't drop it," she shouted and teetered a little more. Again, Big Mac only nodded and exited the kitchen and set off for Ponyville. It was the usual walk over to Ponyville, with the exception of seeing a few rabbits which hurried to move out of Big Mac's way. Other than that, though, it was boring as ever. When he finally arrived in Ponyville, when he neared Sugar Cube Corner, Big Mac couldn't help but look at the skies, as if recently he wasn't entirely sure why he did at certain locations, but it had sort of become a habit for him. It was the only way he could scout for Rainbow Dash and her spying eyes, only he couldn't figure out why he was looking skyward here. Whatever the reason, he shrugged it off and entered into the bakery. Once his head, a smell of delectable sweets and tantalizing tarts entered into his nostrils and carried him forward to the desk. Once there, he looked around at all of the sweet treats and then rang the bell. Almost instantaneous in answering the bell, a high-pitched sing-song voice chimed out from one of the rooms behind the counter. "Coming!" It chimed, and then directly afterwards, none other than Pinkie Pie came skipping out from the doorway with a big wide smile on her face. She stopped dead at the counter, though, when she saw who it was and gasped. Big Macintosh got worried at the gasp for a moment, but then was relieved when Pinkie Pie said, "Hi, Big Mac, I haven't seen you in like forever." She smiled at him and then promptly slipped across the counter to give him a friendly hug. It took him by surprise, but at the same time he liked it. He couldn't help but notice that she smelled absolutely wonderful. She pulled off of him and continued to skip about behind the corner. "Here for the cake?" she asked cheerfully as she continued to skip around. Big Mac smiled and replied, "Yup." "Okie dokie, Loki," Pinkie Pie replied and then grabbed a big bag from the counter. "It's in the back. I'll bag it up right up for ya." She skipped off back into the room and she had come out of, and then returned carrying a bagged up cake in her muzzle. She placed it up on the counter and then brought herself up onto it with the intent of talking to Big Macintosh for a little while. As she just did so, though, she noticed that he kept her eyeing some of the sweets in the display case. She declared to call him on it. "So," she said, "I noticed you keep eyeing those sweets there." She giggled at him when he blushed. "Want a free sample?" she asked with a giggle and dismounted the counter and headed for the case without waiting for an answer. He really needed to be going, and he didn't want to take something that he hadn't worked for, but it all just looked and smelled so delicious he couldn't resist nodding and uttering a quiet "please." She passed him several items ranging from slices of cakes to pieces of tart. Once he at them, she asked, "So, what do you think?" Big Mac merely smiled and nodded his head. "Great," Pinkie Pie said, and started to skip around again. She stopped and gasped once more, though. "You know what?" she began. "I bet you would make an awesome assistant. I've been working on some all-new super-duper great recipes. Will you help me, please?" She smiled widely at him, batted her eyelashes, and gave him a puppy dog eyes to top it all off. Big Mac knew that he had to, and that he should have denied her, but instead he foundered and accepted her offer with a simple "yup" and a smile. Happy to offer his hoof and assistance, he didn't get to come over here very often, but when he did, the food was amazing, and Pinkie Pie and the rest of them made it a very enjoyable experience for him too. It would be an honor for him to help make Sugar Cube Corner deliver better food if they could bear their current recipes, that is. And besides, if all he was going to do was eat a couple of things and leave his feedback on them, he would be back in plenty of time to spare with the cake. "Yay!" Pinkie Pie exclaimed, promptly hugged him again, and then skipped off to the kitchen, dragging him behind her. Once inside, they wasted no time in setting to work. Pinkie Pie laid out slices of some all-new recipes and read Big Macintosh to begin, only she didn't really invite him to, more so shoving the cakes into his face. After he gulped down each bite, Pinkie Pie asked his opinion and was answered every time by a "yup." And that was all she needed to mark it down as something to put on the shelves on her clipboard. As suspected, it didn't take long at all for them to finish up. As a matter of fact, it hadn't even taken 10 minutes. Granted, Big Macintosh's stomach was killing him for eating all of that cake at such a fast pace, but at least he had gotten the chance to help out and still make it back for him back home with plenty of time to spare. Apparently, though, Pinkie Pie had another idea in store for him. She went over to the oven and pulled out another batch of sweets that had been baking this whole time. "Not so fast, Mr. Helper," she said to him. "There's still a few more things I need you to help me with." She put a tray down in front of a big Macintosh that had chocolate chip cookies on it, of all different colors, each representing a flavored dough. Big Mac glanced at the clock, but then he looked down at the cookies and into Pinkie Pie's puppy dog eyes and concluded that it wouldn't hurt to try at least one of the cookies, so he did. And then he left his feedback. He opened his mouth to say that he needed to get going, but before he did, Pinkie Pie chimed in. "I know you need to get going," Pinkie Pie said, and then smiled at him. She took the tray back and popped it in the oven so that the cookies would stay warm. Till Apaluma said happy birthday, she walked around and proceeded to tidy some things up, and Big Macintosh nodded at her and smiled and turned to leave, but she stopped him just before he could. "Hey, can you help me with my apron?" She smiled at him and turned away from him when he came towards her. He reached out with his hoof and began to fiddle with the string. Knots had never been his strong suit, especially one that was tied this intricately. Still, though, some point he would have to take it off for her. He fiddled with a little more, then determined that he wouldn't be doing much of anything with just one hoof. Sensing this, and as she usually had to do whenever Mr. and Mrs. Cake untied it for her, Pinkie Pie propped herself up on the counter in the middle of the room. Big Mac smiled his appreciation at her and went to use both of his hooves. However, it was awkward to his anatomy for him to be fiddling around with his hooves and not supporting himself in any way. In order to support himself, Big Macintosh positioned himself so that he was directly behind her, and he then got up and came over her so that he could just look down and would still be supporting himself. It inevitably looked like he was mounting her. Pinkie Pie knew what he was doing, though, and she was okay with it. Some of the bigger ponies that helped her out would have to do this, as he positioned himself low. He placed his hooves down on both sides of her, and Pinkie Pie couldn't help but take a notice of how he was positioning over her, and how his underside was pushed down against her. "That feels kind of good," she said, and looked up at a blushing Big Macintosh. She giggled at his blushing, and then bumped her rump up against his lower portion, scraping dangerously close to his genitals. Pinkie Pie did it again and again and again, for a total of 4 times. She giggled and chuckled at how Big Macintosh was looking down at, blushing, and trying to keep himself from becoming aroused. The way her tight butt was teasing him, and the way that she was indicating to him that she wanted it, it was all too much for him, and Big Macintosh became aroused. His cock started to extend and eventually poked Pinkie Pie in her no place. "Oh," she said and looked back at it. "You're a big boy." She smiled widely at the sight of it. In a flash, she whipped out from underneath him and quickly got out of her apron, the knot loosened just enough by Big Mac's previous tinkering. She let it drop down to the floor like she was dropping off a saddle and readying herself for sex. Big Mac was adamant, though, and he tried his best to get around her. Nope, he stuttered and tried to proceed ahead, but she was too fast for him. She blocked him off, got face to face with him, and said, "Oh, come on, Big Mackie, you know you want this. Besides, I have to thank you some way. Now that would be rude if I didn't." She peeked around his side and eyed his cock, and then looked back up at him. "You know, those are one of my favorite types of candies. Don't worry, though," she giggled. "I know I'm not supposed to bite." Big Mac gulped. Before he could move any, he looked down to see Pinkie Pie down beneath him, poking, prodding, and playing with his cock. Laying on her stomach, she used her front hooves to poke at it, and eventually began to rub it slowly. She showed her enjoyment, toying with both him and his genitals by giggling, and even craning her head forward and then kissing him on the penis, and even on the testicles a few times. She saw that he was floundering, thinking about it, but she knew that she would have to up her game a little to make him do this with her. She positioned herself so that she was underneath him, even more promptly placed his cock into her mouth. She began to suck him off slowly and easily, allowing her saliva to get all over his cock. Soon even, she was able to force all of his cock into her mouth. Amazingly, she didn't even stop there. Pinkie Pie adjusted so that she was flat on her stomach and continued to push herself upwards until he was completely inside her mouth, completely down her throat, and until her nose was touching his scrotum. As if it wasn't enough, she held it there longer than Applejack had, and moved her lips forward and backwards quickly along the bottom of his shaft. The way she had forced him down in her throat, and the way that she continued to suck him off, even when she really had no mouth to suck him off with, was enough to nearly drive him to point of orgasm, and she knew it. Teasing him still, she pulled off of him and caught her breath when he was all the way out of her mouth. When she was able to get out from underneath him and get a good look at him, she saw that he was breathing heavily and was showing all of the guilty signs of pleasure. "Wow!" she exclaimed. That That was fun. I might have to do it again. She winked at him and prompted a blush. Until then, though, why don't you repay the favor? She smiled at him and then propped herself up at the counter in front of him. She cast her tail aside and revealed her tight pink pussy, soaked with juices at her arousal from having taken him into her mouth. Big Mac walked towards her, preparing to mount her once more, but before he was able to move in for the kill, Pinkie Pie brought her tail back over her genitals and looked back at him with a playful smirk on her face. She waved her hoof at him in a scolding kind of way and said, in a sing-song way. You have to repay the favor first. She winked at him once more and moved her tail aside when he nodded. Big Mac came forward just one step more, lowered his head, and then stuck his muzzle into her vagina. Pinkie Pie let out a gasp of pleasure as he wasted no time in laying his tongue into her. At first he looked steadily up and down on her outer lips, careful to get all of her sweet juices in the process. After that, he pushed his tongue inside of her and began to circle it around inside of her. Pinkie Pie gasped in pleasure once more, and by the sheer pleasure that she was feeling, reached forward and grabbed a bowl of mix and began to stir it in an attempt to keep herself from coming. Big Mac did an amazing job as he pushed his tongue inside of her and then pulled it out at a quick pace, then licked up and down on her nice, plump labia. Not only was it pleasurable to her, but it was pleasurable for him as well. Pinkie Pie tasted amazing. Not only that, but he felt so good on his tongue. As guilty and conflicted about it in the back of his mind as he was, Big Mac could barely wait to get inside of her. Pinkie Pie seemed to sense this and decided that she would go ahead and let him do it because she too could barely contain her anticipation for him inside of her. Okay, Big Mackie, she said and smiled back at him. I think that's good enough. Go ahead, she said essentially. Take me. Wasting no time in obeying her commands, Big Mac reared up and at the same time Pinkie Pie pushed the bowl away and crossed her forelegs up on the counter in an attempt to brace herself for Big Mac's massive cock penetrating into her. He pushed his penis into her, and Pinkie Pie first let out a gasp of sheer pleasure and then exclaimed, "Wow!" with bated breath as he pushed all the way inside of her. Big Mac pulled out of her, and then he pushed right back inside of her and continued to do so with varying speed and intensity. Pinkie Pie's juices came pouring out of her pussy, ran all down her legs, and those that didn't stick in her fur ran all the way down to the floor of the bakery. She was like a well or a waterfall as he kept thrusting into her, forcing more juice out of her with every single thrust. Unable to control the sensations that she was feeling, Pinkie Pie could only wink her pussy in pleasure as Big Mac thrust inside of her and then pulled back. He kept the things mild at first, but then he switched over to hard and began to more or less throw himself inside of Pinkie Pie. She let out a muffled "ah!" with each and every thrust as he drilled balls deep into her over and over again. It didn't take him but 4 balls deep thrusts into her to make Pinkie Pie let out a cry of passion, buckle slightly at the knees, and then have a powerful orgasm. Her juices shot all about the place and absolutely coated Big Mac's underside. He didn't mind though because it felt rather nice. Still wanting to keep things fresh, she switched from going into her hard to going into her fast. He took one final balls deep thrust into her and then upon the near pull out thrust into her sharply and quickly, then pulled back out just as sharply and just as quickly. Over and over again as he did this, his balls swinging back and forth and crashing into her clitoris like a wrecking ball with each and every thrust, until eventually he felt like he was getting close to orgasm. Pinkie Pie sensed this and went to make a move, but before she could do so, Big Mac made her come once more. Again she buckled at the knees, and the juices came flying and pouring out of her pussy, coating Big Mac's underside and his cock too, and water falling down her legs. Just as she recuperated from the orgasm, Pinkie Pie could only judge by the way he was flailing his tail around and was breathing heavier and heavier that he was right on the brink. She didn't have much time to move, but somehow she managed to. Just as Big Mac took one final and powerful thrust, Pinkie Pie pushed back on him, and inevitably grabbed the mixing bowl with the cake mix in it, and then whipped quickly around so that she was sitting up against the bottom of the counter. Big Mac unloaded everywhere, and his cum first hit her right in the mouth and in the face. But for the next round, she reached up and steered his cock tooth so that it was pointed right into the bowl. He unloaded it in there, and Pinkie Pie licked her lips, pulling even more cum into her mouth. As she could barely wait to taste her new accidentally created concoction, the final load that he busted came and drifted out onto her stomach and onto her upwards facing pussy. When he finished coming, Big Mac dismounted the counter and stood beside her, where he then watched the pink pony lick the cum off of her face, smear it into her fur, and push it down towards her pussy. When she finished, she put the bowl up on the counter, stirred it up a little, a little and then licked the spoon. Mmm, she exclaimed, that's delicious. She took one more lick of the specially mixed dough and then put the spoon down. She turned towards him and then, with a smile on her face, said, this is going to be my own very special cake. Big Mac blushed deeply at Pinkie Pie ingesting his sperm via her cake. It was attractive to him, sure, but it was also embarrassing, a guilty pleasure after that, though. Her demeanor changed to innocently sexy once more, and she walked slowly towards him. You know, I absolutely love the taste of this stuff. Big Mac blushed even harder, and she continued, especially when it comes from you. She winked at him, kissed him on the cheek, and then skipped over to the oven as innocently as could be and took out some more sweets. Meanwhile, Big Mac spotted the clock once more. When he saw the time, his eyes grew wide. When he discovered that he was going to be late, without thinking, he whipped around, ran towards the counter, grabbed the cake off of it, and took off out the door, running as fast as he could. Of all times to be late, this wasn't one of them. Apple Bloom wouldn't never forgive him, and worst of all, Granny Smith would never let him hear the end of it. He gripped the bag even tighter with his teeth so that it wouldn't shake around so much, and continued to run full speed towards Sweet Apple Acres. Back at Sugar Cube Corner, though, Pinkie Pie was left standing there, her mouth agape at his speed of exit, staring after him. Within a few seconds, though, Pinkie Pie started to chuckle to herself and then said, I wonder what he had to get to so fast. She hummed a little tune to herself as she tidied up around the kitchen, but then she gasped and then knocked herself on the head. That's right, she exclaimed to herself, Apple Bloom's birthday! She chuckled once more and finished tidying up. I'm such a klutz, she said. Everything all clean now. She parked herself back up on the counter and was quiet for a few seconds. She looked over at the bowl full of cake mix and cum, then dipped the end of her hoof into it, and then licked the dough of. And she said, and then got just one more little nibble. You know, she hopped off of the counter. I really should get this baking. The end. Alright, I thought Pinkie Pie was gonna be like the fourth dimension breaker in this and like confront Big Mac like Rainbow did, but because Rainbow knows that this is all going on, and technically guessing she is spying on him during this. Alright. Wonder what the next chapter will bring. Anyways, guys, thank you all for listening, doing whatever the fuck you guys do, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye. 100,000 stories.